It is wonderful to see so many shiny, happy faces. My name is Brian Lane. I'm the Director of Debate here at the University of North Texas, and I just wanted to take a brief moment to welcome everybody to our culminating event for Debate Day Fall of 2018. Woohoo! Some of you have been here since 10:30 this morning. We've had a total of 15 different debates. We had 119 people debating in this space, many for the first time, talking about the topic of genetic enhancement for children. As many of you know, this is a topic selected for the Innovate Nanomedicine Conference held in Houston in February of 2019. We're very excited to be one of the few universities in the United States hosting a competition and a series of debates on this very, very timely topic. Let me take a moment to welcome our guests from Southern Methodist. Our Mustangs are here. We're pleased to have from Southern Methodist University Bryce Morgan and Maggie Cook-Allen defending their side. They're joined by their Director of Debate, Dr. Ben Vogt. Ben, could you stand up? Meanwhile, UNT debate is going to be defended on here by the affirmative side. Please welcome Joy Sandoval. And our Vice President of UNT debate, Emily Jackson. So with no further ado, I'll allow the affirmative to talk. We're going to have a formulated structure following the Team IPDA format, which means there will be cross-examination periods. Our debaters are all familiar with the format. They know exactly what's going on. Today they'll be debating that parents should have the right to genetically enhance their children using nanotechnology. Please, Joy.
We affirm the resolution that parents should have the right to genetically enhance their children using nanotechnology. We would like to define two terms today. Nanotechnology is defined as the science of manipulating materials on an atomic or molecular scale according to Merriam-Webster. Also, we argue that genetic enhancement has to be defined situationally. When a disease is common in an area, it becomes the norm for that population to be just predisposed to that same disease. So when we are analyzing the resolution, it is important to acknowledge that any genetic alleviation to the risk of disease through nanotechnology is considered an enhancement. However, not all enhancements are the same. The affirmative advocates for the use of genetic enhancements in the instances in which it reduces the risk of disease that threaten the life of a child. The Nuffield Council on Bioethics says that changing the DNA of human embryo is morally permissible if it is in the child's best interest. As a result, we argue that the burden of the affirmative is to prove that genetic enhancement can be beneficial for individuals, while the burden of the negative is to prove that genetic enhancement is bad in all circumstances. Contention 1 is non-transmissible diseases. Despite the difficulties involved in treating all types of cancers, the scientific community writ large is already aware of many of the problem genes that greatly increase your risk of contracting cancer. These genes include the BRCA1, BRCA2, and P53, and researchers have already set their sights in testing treatments to remove the harmful mutations that can lead to cancer. Dr. Luhan Yang said in an interview with the MIT Tech Review in 2015 that research was already underway in Harvard labs to replace harmful mutations to BRCA1 in human eggs that could serve as proof of principle to allow modifications to other genes that drastically increase the risk of contracting cancer. However, full implementation is impossible now as current standards prevent human germline modification, even to repair proto-oncogene mutations. Far more lifelong conditions in cancer can be prevented through germline modification. In August of 2017, a team of scientists led by Dr. Hong Ma published a study showing that they had successfully repaired a mutation in the MYBPC3 gene, which can increase the risk of a series of lifelong heart conditions. Additionally, Dr. George Church, professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School, argued in an interview with Stat News in 2015 that germline modification to address harmful mutations should always be considered in scenarios in which treating and possibly pre-screening single germ cells is safer than treating millions of somatic cells, since each cell adds to the collective risk of developing cancer. In this case, prevention is always going to be better than treatment, because usage of gene therapy in adults causes far higher risk of cancer and more conditions to treat in the long term. Contention 2 is genetic immunity. Genetic enhancements can also be extremely successful at preventing certain viruses from being able to infect cells. In early April 2016, Nature News reported that a Chinese research team successfully knocked out the CCR5 gene in human embryos. Typically, this gene codes for the binding site where HIV is able to infect human cells. While this mutation exists in the human population naturally, it is exceedingly rare and confers complete immunity to the HIV virus. Just a little over 2 years ago, similar research was done by the researcher Dr. He Jianyu, which controversially resulted in the birth of twin girls who both did not have a functional CCR5 gene. While this seems like a radical step, HIV has notably been resistant to most attempts to treat it, with it boasting a mutation rate so high that according to the Centers for Infectious Disease in research in 2016, during the first 10 days of infection, a single strain of HIV is estimated to mutate more times than all of the known strains of influenza have mutated in all of human history. This high mutation rate both means that HIV is surprisingly quick to adapt to most attempts to use drugs to combat it, and treatment often means rotating through a series of antivirals, some of which can be incredibly expensive. Uncertainty in treatment and lack of access is the reason why over 1 million people still die due to HIV complications every year. However, conferring immunity to HIV via CCR5 knockouts in embryos can act much like a vaccine normally would, directly protecting those who are genetically enhanced and indirectly protecting those who are not via the creation of a form of herd immunity surrounding HIV. This, combined with current treatments, means that we may be able to eradicate this disease entirely. And for those reasons, we urge an affirmative ballot.
All right, 2 minutes on the clock. Is my opponent ready? My audience ready? Now let's begin. All right, just a couple of questions. What was your definition of morally permissible?
Okay, so morally permissible, we're saying for it to be morally permissible, it has to be in the child's best interest, so as long as it meets that criteria.
So would it be in a child's best interest to change their gender?
What we're advocating specifically, if you would like to bring that in your case, that's fine, but we're advocating specifically for disease, right? We're saying that, of course, not all instances are going to be the best. That's why with the affirmative, we're allowing for it to happen in a way that's, one, ethical, but second, actually proven to work and be beneficial for the individuals that it's affected.
Okay, so with this nanotechnology, what all are you able to change?
Right, so in the instances that we talk about specifically, we say pretty much like it's kind of works as a shot kind of for diseases. Specifically in contention 1, we talk about how we're able to stop the BRCA1, BRCA2,
Right.
BRCA3, which is what causes cancer.
How much would this cost for one child?
Right, so this is already happening in the status quo. What we like to argue is that any treatment that exists right now in the status quo is going to be more expensive than the
No, that doesn't
alternatives
answer
we
my
have.
question. What does it cost right now for one child?
For one child, about the same that it costs for the treatment to happen in the status quo, unless you have
What is that treatment cost?
It depends on the situation.
That's why we're saying it has to be defined situationally. So if you would like to bring up specific instances in your case, that's fine, but the ones that we talk about, it's plausible because it's not more than what treatment already costs right now in the status quo.
Right. Who's to say that it wouldn't be in a child's best interest to change their brain so it's be more intelligent?
Okay, so that's exactly what we're trying to differentiate, right? We're saying that for the affirmative to actually be ethical, we can only change instances in which it puts the life in danger. We're not saying we're going to make designer babies. That's exactly what we're trying to fight, right?
But
we're
isn't
saying
that exactly what this is?
No, so we argue that if that were going to happen, like these scientists have the technology to do it now, right? What we're saying is that if you vote for the affirmative, it allows us to actually come to a solution in which we would be able to do this ethically. But furthermore, with the framework, it would have to be ethical for it to even pass.
Thank you.
All right. Are my opponents ready?
Yes.
Is my teammate ready?
Ready.
Is the audience ready? Fantastic. Then let's begin. First of all, I want to thank my opponents for coming out and bringing forward an excellent case. I want to thank the University of North Texas for hosting us today. And I want to thank the director of the program at the University of North Texas debate team, as well as the director of our program here at SMU for helping make this event happen. Without further ado, I want to talk a little bit about this topic here. I want to begin with a quote. Pandora's box has been opened, and we still might have a glimmer of hope to close it before it's too late. That was a quote from the letter released by 120 scientists this week in response to the baby editing situation that's actually occurring right now in China with regard to the CRISPR gene editing that my opponents actually touched on a little bit. Furthermore, I want to take a little bit of an issue with what they brought forward in their burdens. They said that we must prove that it's bad in all situations. I want to bring this back to the resolution, which is parents should have the right to genetically enhance their children with nanotechnology. We would argue that this is a simple cost-benefit analysis situation. We should be looking at which side has more cost versus which side has more benefits to society as a whole. So with that in mind, I want to move into my first contention, which is the scientific consensus, and this actually ties very much into my opponent's case. Currently in China, if you haven't heard about it, it's in the news, and in fact there is big news about it today. There is an issue with a gene editing situation that was not sanctioned by the government, that was not sanctioned by the university where it was taking place. There was a researcher whose name is He Zhengwei, who said he altered embryos for 7 couples during fertility treatments, the goal of which was to prevent AIDS infection in the future. There was only 1 successful pregnancy, allegedly, and scientists say that there's no guarantee that these edits will actually work, and they might, in fact, harm the babies that were edited in utero. So in a letter from 120 scientists, they said that this is crazy. This experiment is totally crazy because we simply aren't there technologically yet. Such irreversible alterations on human genes will inevitably go into the human gene pool, and once that happens, the cat's out of the bag. We can't stop these as soon as that's occurred. University of Pennsylvania called it unconscionable, and the university where it occurred said that this seriously violated ethics standards. This shows that we're simply not there yet, anywhere close to being able to allow this technology to go mainstream. My second contention is that genetic editing should not be considered a right. Again, bringing this back to the resolution phrasing that parents should have the right to genetically enhance their children. Subpoint A is that, if anything, genetic editing would be a privilege because it requires the services of a gene editing specialist, it requires medical personnel. This is expensive, and it would drive inequality. Furthermore, subpoint B, if you decided that this was going to be provided by the government on the taxpayer dime as a right, the cost to the taxpayer would be enormous. And this is bad, but also consider the political infeasibility of something like that, trying to make it a right, which my opponent, I would note, has not defined what a right is in the context of this debate. Subpoint C is consent. Children are not able to give consent, especially for such profound modifications, especially before they've been born. We have to take this into consideration, and my opponent has not adequately considered this point in their case. My third contention is genocide. Subpoint A. This technology could be used to create a perfect group or to make an existing group within the population go extinct very easily. Again, as soon as we allow this to go mainstream, the cat's out of the bag. These modifications, especially when they're inheritable, they immediately spread through the population. You have a very difficult situation trying to get that actually under control, which is why we should be much more cautious. Subpoint B is extinction. Taken to its logical conclusion, something like this could result in an extinction of specific members of the population, specific groups of the population. And that's according to Washington University School of Medicine. My fourth contention is the idea of editing as shopping. My opponents tried to define this out of the realm, but it's simply completely salient if we look at the resolution as it stands. Parents should have the right to genetically enhance their children. We can't just limit that to genetic modification. We have to look at this on a more holistic scale. Subpoint A of that is perfectionism. Gene editing would simply distort family and other relationships by encouraging notions of human beings as biologically alterable artifacts. That's a quote from the Center for Genetics and Society. Subpoint B, technology could and would be used to perpetuate sexist ideals. Women could be made prettier, men could be made more testosterone-filled and stronger. All this progress that we've had on gender equality could be reversed in a second with this technology. And finally, C, there's an ability to choose traits in your child that can immediately, there's obviously a slippery slope here. Because if you can choose your traits, including sex, then you have a society that's all men, or at least much more leaning towards men, which obviously has huge social consequences. I stand down for cross-examination. Two minutes on the clock.
Oh, do we have a right to health care?
Do we have a right to health care? Well, it depends on what you mean by right. I know that you haven't defined what a right is.
That's okay, you can use it any way you want. Do we have a right to health care?
I think that, so if we're looking at this in the terms of like, say, a negative right, where you simply have it as you are, it's not given to anybody, then obviously you wouldn't, because that would require you to have the service of somebody else.
Okay, so do we have a right to shelter? Do we have a right to food?
I'm not sure. How would you like me to define right for the purposes of answering that question?
Literally whichever way you want to.
All right, well, if we're defining it as negative rights, as in freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of association, then no, you wouldn't, because that requires the services of somebody else.
Thank you. So do infants consent to being vaccinated?
Infants do not consent to being vaccinated. However, I would note that there's a broad difference between the idea of vaccination to prevent the disease after the child has been born. And if we're looking at this genetic enhancement, including shopping, including perfectionism, and creating sex-selective modification, there's a big difference between that and vaccination. We can't just lump them into the same
So
thing.
are sex and gender the same thing?
I'm not sure how that's salient to this debate.
Well, specifically talk about how we would be able to alter gender, right? I'm just asking you if gender and sex are the same thing.
For the purposes of this debate, let's say you could alter sex using this technology.
Okay. So pretty much, can you kind of just give me your link to your subpoint B, specifically in contention 3, talking about how it would lead to extinction? Like, what's the probability of that happening, considering that the technology already exists and is being used right now in the status quo?
I'm not sure what you mean by the technologies already exist and is used
Right,
now in
so
the
you're
status
saying that
quo.
it would lead to extinction, right? My question is, this is already happening right now, so at what point are we going to lead to extinction? Because that's what you're claiming, right?
Well, I'm saying that it could certainly lead to extinction, especially the
Right,
things
you're
that are
saying
being
it could lead
developed
to
right now.
extinction.
Yeah, exactly. I'm
Okay.
saying that this is why we need to be more cautious. That actually flows into my case, because we're saying that we can't give people the
Do you
right...
have a threshold for that?
A threshold for what?
Because it's happening in the status quo. You're not saying if you pass the AF plan, this happens. It's happening right now.
Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here. This is one of the larger crowds I've seen at our public debates. I'd like to thank SMU for coming up here to have this debate. And I'd like to thank the university for allowing us to use this room for this debate to happen. Now, a couple of things that I'm going to do in this speech. First, I'm going to discuss a couple of the misconceptions that my opponent has about the way that we discuss the topic. Then I'm going to discuss exactly what they're saying on their case and refute a couple of their points. And then I'm going to discuss our case. Now, first, I would like to talk about the way that we view the round. They say that we should look at it through a cost-benefit analysis. So let's think of the concept of rights. Now, the UN Declaration of Human Rights declares that food, shelter, the right to freedom of movement, and healthcare are a good example of a couple of rights that all humans have by virtue of being human. I'd argue that just because we have the right to food does not mean I have the right to cannibalize somebody. Just because I have the right to shelter does not mean that I am obligated to have the biggest mansion in town. This is exactly why merely affirming a right to genetic enhancement does not mean that we are going to increase the intelligence or create designer babies. Merely that there is some form of right that exists, which is why we argue that it's the negative burden to actually answer the examples that we bring up. Namely, that we argue that parents have the right to genetically enhance their children in cases where it decreases the chances of disease in the future. We argue that as a result, this would decrease rates of disease in the population. I also argue that just because I have the right to be surgically treated by a hospital doesn't mean I have the right to have plastic surgery, which is exactly why I would also argue that this is not going to necessarily lead to designer babies in the future. But beyond that, they say that we haven't defined a right. I'd say that we should use the international consensus as done by the UN Declaration of Human Rights. There are certain few things that humans need in order to survive, and that humans are therefore obligated to have some form of access to. As a result, we'd say that it's along those broad things. Not necessarily negative rights, but also not necessarily positive rights. Because I would affirm that all people have a right to food, despite the fact that that is not a negative right. Then, let's talk about the negative case. They have 4 contentions. I'm going to go down them one by one. The first is that there's a scientific consensus against this, but they ignore the fact that this is very broad and is not answering the specifics of the situation. Merely, he said that this would release the gene into the gene pool, but ignores that the specific situation they're talking about is merely implementing an uncommon gene that already exists in the human gene pool on a far wider scale, which means that 1, the broad impacts that they're talking about are not going to occur because scientists tend to be a lot more responsible than that, and 2, by legalizing this, we are able to create ethics boards that are actually able to regulate it when it occurs, which means that it's not going to happen illegally, as it did then. It's going to happen legally and allow ethics boards to sign off on when this occurs. Second, They say that this is not a right, merely it's a question of consent. One, nobody is able to give medical consent for any treatments that are done on them before the age of 18. This is not any change in the status quo. I did not give consent to be vaccinated when I was an infant. Which means that ultimately this question of consent flies in the face of reality. You can't ask an infant or a fetus to give consent, even though emergency treatments are done on fetuses every day. Then, they talk about genocide. First, I challenge them to give a clear reason why this would happen. They say that this leads to making some populations undesirable. That already occurs through in vitro fertilization, people specifically decreasing the risk of their children having certain ailments. But second, it also empowers people in some of these populations. Take Nicholas Auger's case study of 2 deaf lesbians who lived in the UK. They wanted to have a child who was also deaf like them, but they were unable to do that because sperm banks specifically rejected the sperm of any man who had a genetic ailment that caused them to be deaf. They were unable to have a child like them, and as a result, genetic enhancement can also be used to allow parents to have children who they are able to are like them, and empower some of these communities who are already discriminated against when it comes to sperm banks. But finally, they talk about genes of shopping. First of all, I challenge them to show how this specifically links to the model that we outlined in our case. But second, it's unlikely to happen, especially insofar as in vitro fertilization exists now and already allows it to happen.
All right, 2 minutes on the clock. Is my opponent ready?
Yes.
Is the audience ready? Tremendous. Then let's get this started. So, what do you know about the CRISPR gene editing experiment that occurred in China over the last few weeks and that's come out over the last few weeks?
Well, actually, yeah, it occurred over the past 3 years. The scientists had taken embryos done for IVF and had used CRISPR technology to implement a knockout gene for CCP3, which is the coding gene for. Okay.
Would you call this experiment ethical?
No, because it was without consent. We're allowing people to give consent to these experiments.
Explain that to me?
Yeah, so it happened without the consent of the parents. I'd argue that by allowing parents to give consent to these experiments, this allows these things to happen ethically. The fact that it is illegal is the reason why it was unethical, and changing that would cause these experiments to happen legally in the future.
Thank you. Was the school aware of this occurring in their labs?
No, because it was illegal.
Okay. Now, how were the parents recruited?
Through a series of trial subjects. They were going in and told that they were going to be in a HIV vaccine study.
Okay, thank you. So you're saying that they were not aware that this research was going on?
I don't understand how this is salient to why we should legalize this.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
Okay.
My partners. Are my opponents ready? All right, let's begin. I do want to start off by thanking everybody so much for being here. I want to thank UNT for hosting us today, and my opponents for coming out. With that, I'm going to focus on their case in this speech, kind of go down line by line and show why you really should vote for the negative today. So first we talk about what's morally permissible. They say that what is morally permissible is whatever benefits the child. However, what does beneficial mean? They talk about it being diseases, but who says it stops there? Because beneficial isn't a word we use just talking about health. For example, would it be beneficial to help these children to enhance their appearance? Maybe change some traits because maybe that means they do better in school, they have some friends. Is that a good medical reason? There's no real bright line as to what is beneficial as a gene editing process. Moving down a little bit more, they talk about these ethics boards, that by making this legal, we'll have these ethics boards created. However, according to the South China Morning Post, the Chinese National Health Commission, somebody supposed to oversee these types of things, actually saw his experiments on the internet and they were shocked. They said they were shocked as anybody else, and they were completely in the dark. They had no idea. So, additionally, my opponents also bring up the fact that there was no consent from these families. So, with all of these things, with this board already in place, we see that the boards are essentially useless. That if we have these ethics boards, that will make it all ethical and be legal. No, they're doing nothing now. There's no reason to think they will in the future. Right, moving down to their first contention, talking about health. They mentioned the point that they can take out a lot of diseases and help the world. However, there's actually some problems with this. They bring up the idea of cancer, but my first response to this is the potential to cause cancer. So according to the Australian National University and a CRISPR expert of Bergio, he says there's actually a risk of causing some cells to become cancerous. This is because when you go into the body and you make a lot of changes to the genome, it's actually going to try to create more cells, and that's what cancer is, creating too many cells and not being able to stop it. So there's actually a chance to causing cancer. This is because you're also ruining the genome. That's our second response, is ruining the genome. So studies in mice and human cells show that about 1/5 of cells, CRISPR causes rearrangements or deletions of more than 100 letters, sometimes thousands of letters, just completely wiping out that genome. And because that causes a lot of problems, it can cause, according to the Center for Genetics in Society, it causes the child to die later, lead to miscarriage, stillbirth, maternal injuries, and problems later in life that we don't even know about. Moving on to our last contention about societal gap. In their second contention, they talk about genetic immunity and how right now there's a problem with HIV because people don't have access to medication. However, this will actually make that problem worse because our first point under that is the unfair opportunity. So rich families could actually be able to help their children by using this, edit out disorders, while poor people would not be able to afford this. And so you're actually helping one side of the population, but really hurting another and increasing a really big health gap at that point. A health gap, an appearance gap, athleticism gap, whatever you want to call it. So this significant gap causes a lot of problems because you're actually leaving the poor behind, especially if we're talking about genes. They're able to pass on this HIV, they're able to pass on whatever other genetic issues there are, but rich people actually don't have that problem. So you're not creating a poor class, an unhealthy class, while you have a rich class able to exceed, while a poor class isn't going to be able to. You even divide society further with this. You're only causing pain in that regard. So our last response to that, under that, is just actually there creates an even bigger problem when it comes to some cheating. There's an example of that from Schwarzenegger mice have been bred so that their muscles will grow rapidly. This was meant to be a medical thing, but it kind of spiraled out of control because genome got figured out that this could actually be used in sports to give athletes an unfair advantage over others. So it would be type of steroids, but in fact, it'd be harder to detect. So it's actually really unfair to have some athletes have access to this or have children have access to this and grow up in that regard and still not be able to compete against other teammates. So with that, I stand up for cross-examination. Thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you.
Okay. So the study that you read against our first contention, Bergio?
Yes, Australian National University.
Yeah, so under what circumstances is it studying the risk of CRISPR creating cancer?
It's just a general study looking at what are the ultimate effects.
Okay,
is
so
this a good idea or not?
Okay, so is it specifically looking at somatic cells?
It's looking at human cells.
Okay, so somatic cells or germline cells?
I believe it's looking at, it might be looking at both actually, though looking at cancerous, it'd be more somatic cells.
Okay, so are CRISPR enhancements of infants done on somatic cells or germline cells?
Well, you're able to do it on either with CRISPR actually, because it doesn't differentiate between what type of cell you're going into.
Yeah, I understand how CRISPR works. I was wondering if, so the specific process for modification though, isn't it done on the egg prior to fertilization?
It can be, but this is also something that can actually be done in
Isn't
adult
that the
humans
current
as well.
practice?
It's something that can actually be done in adult human cells as well, because this is where we see
Okay,
this
so is the resolution talking about the use of CRISPR in adult human cells?
It's talking about children, so that can be people up to 18. So still not eggs, but people that are just under a few years of us, really close to our age.
Okay, so would that, okay. So can you tell me about why this might create an unfair opportunity between the poor and the rich?
Because right now this is a new technology and it's very expensive.
Okay.
We talk about what we already have. In vitro fertilization is crazy expensive. This would be even worse.
Okay.
So if rich people are able to afford
And
this,
what's the impact of cheating in athletics?
cheating in athletics is bad. It's unfair For sports,
So is it worse than dying of, cancer or heart disease?
well, we see that this is actually going to cause bigger problems in that in poor population. So you're actually increasing the prevalence.
Wait, why
of that
does cheating cause big problems in poor populations?
On a cost-benefit analysis, we see it's clearly should go with the negative today.
Okay.
It's like a filing cabinet to carry around. All right. All right, we've got 3 minutes on the clock. Are my opponents ready? Yes, okay, cool. My teammate ready?
Ready.
My audience ready? All right, let's get this party started. All right, well, I want to thank my opponents again. This has been a fantastic debate so far, and I'm looking forward to getting straight into it with this rebuttal. So before I begin, I want to clarify that we're not arguing that parents should never at any point in the future possibly have a right to do something like this. It's just that the entire scientific community, save for a few small exceptions, say it's absolutely not a good idea right now. And that's reflected by our first contention, actually, and I don't think my opponents have adequately refuted that. They're saying we need to jump on this right now, and that's simply not the best idea at this time. I could read these quotes over again, but I think that we've certainly made a good enough impact with them, is that hundreds and hundreds of scientists across countries, across continents, are saying this is incredibly dangerous to start now because we don't know where this is going to go. We have to go through a lot more testing because these are new technologies. They're not established. They're not part of the status quo yet. We're making these huge strides in things like with CRISPR, and we need to have more vetting, more testing before we get to a point where these can actually be considered anything close to a right. With that in mind, I want to go through a little bit more of our case here. Our first contention obviously relates to the scientific consensus, which is entirely on our side of this issue. I think that you should consider that very strongly when evaluating this debate. Our second contention talks about how genetic editing is not a right, and our opponents have actually come with the definition that is directly refuted by our first subpoint A. The idea that if anything, genetic editing will be a privilege, and the idea that this is going to be entirely politically infeasible if you say we need to tax people at such a rate that we can actually pay for this on an elective basis. If you're saying that anybody can modify their children in any way, that's an incredibly, incredibly expensive proposition. So it can't happen politically. Not to say that it shouldn't happen at some point in the future when these technologies are safe, just that it can't happen now in the political, geopolitical, social realm that we live in currently. Our third contention has to do with genocide. We're talking about ideas like this technology could be used in ways that could create a perfect group or to make an existing group go extinct. Again, as soon as we have these options on the table, people can abuse them. That's human nature, and that's what's going to happen. My opponents have said, what proof do you have? We can't tell you what exactly is going to happen in the future because this technology is not live yet. We're seeing these huge strides going on over in China. The scientific community has condemned them because they're too soon. We can't do this right now, and if we look at the resolution is phrased as such. If I can find it, it's someplace around here. It has to do with parents have to have the right to genetically modify their children, implying right now. Finally, our fourth contention about editing as shopping talks about, again, more abuses, because this is human nature, and it is very, very possible as this technology goes mainstream. Therefore, I want to encourage you to vote. If we're looking at this through a weighing mechanism of cost-benefit analysis, I want to encourage you to support the negative in today's debate. Thank you very much.
I would like to start off by extending our framework, talking about how we have to look at how it's going to impact these people. The first voter for today is going to be that we have to look at the impact of what's happening to individuals. We tell you that millions of people are dying every single year due to HIV. We're saying that we have technology right now in the status quo that is going to work. They have not once come up here and disproved that. They just keep extending their case. Therefore, that has to flow to the affirmative. We're saying that the technology exists right now. The only thing that's lacking is pretty much the way in which we do it, which is why voting for the affirmative would allow us to do it in a way that is ethical. But next, I'm going to pretty much just address the negative case first. Specifically on the contention 1, he talks about how it's unfair because it's hurting people. But we're saying that exists right now in the status quo, so it's not unique, right? There's already people who can't afford treatment, but furthermore, we say that prevention is actually cheaper than treatment. That is always going to be true in the instances where treatments for cancer can cost up to thousands and thousands of dollars for an individual. We're saying that prevention is always going to be cheaper, therefore that argument does not flow across in today's debate. But furthermore, their argumentation on contention 1 talks about how the 120 scientists don't agree to this. However, they're specifically talking about what we don't advocate for. We're telling you that we are concerned with ethics. They oppose designer babies, so do we. That's why we have to do the affirmative plan in order to do it in a way that is ethical. They don't come up here and disprove this at any point of the debate. They just keep telling you what bad things could happen, but that's not a reason to actually vote for the negative. But furthermore, onto the contention 2 of no right, they talk about how it's a privilege. But again, we tell you that prevention is always going to be cheaper than treatment. This whole argumentation telling you that it's going to be just absolutely terrible for people who might be poor. That's just not true. Inherently, we can see that it's already happening in the status quo. The affirmative is the only way that we could actually come to a solution that would help these people. But furthermore, onto the contention 3, we should not take this whole genocide argumentation into consideration. This is absolutely absurd. This technology is happening right now. They say that, of course, we can't tell you when it's going to happen. That's exactly why you don't buy this argument. They say that extinction will happen, but don't tell you how, don't tell you when, because this technology already exists. Therefore, this is not an argument in today's debate. Which leaves us with a contention 4 about like shopping for our babies, right? They say that it's going to happen and it's going to lead to perfectionism. However, it's not happening right now in the status quo. But furthermore, voting for the affirmative is the only instance in which we would have an ethical way that they would not be allowed to do this, right? What's happening here is that they're giving you kind of like this nice story where if you vote for the negative, these bad things won't happen. No. Scientists are doing this right now. That's why voting for the affirmative is the only instance in which we would be able to have kind of like liability for these scientists whenever we're talking about in terms of this research. But more importantly, onto our case, on our framework, they specifically talk about how the China experiment was not ethical. But first, that wasn't legal. But second, we allow this technology to be used in a way that is ethical. It's literally proving our point. But furthermore, onto the contention 1, they say that, what does this mean? Are we going to be able to change appearance? What? We're not specifying this, right? Our framework, entire minute of our case was telling you that we will only use this nanotechnology in the instance where it will save a child's life. That is what you have to take into consideration in today's debate. They want you to focus on the bad things that could maybe happen in the future. We're telling you that technology exists right now in the status quo, and we can actually save children's lives, and they haven't come up here and disproved any of that. And that is a really big reason why you have to vote for the affirmative side of today's debate. Onto the genetic immunity, they say that there's a risk of cancer, but first, the argumentation was based on somatic cells that is used in adults, not children. Therefore, the argumentation does not flow at all. But again, the study in the contention 1 actually takes that into consideration, talking about how it's actually going to be more beneficial to take the risk and have this genetic immunity rather than going with the status quo. For all these reasons, I urge an affirmative ballot.
On the clock. My partner ready?
Yes.
My opponent's ready. Yeah, got it right this time. All right, let's wrap this up. I want to start this last speech by thanking everybody so much for being here. I really enjoyed this. So with that, I'm going to give you some strong reasons to vote for the negative today. Show you why parents should most definitely not have the right to genetically enhance their children with nanotechnology. So we want to talk about the framework. Our opponent said we're only going to use this when we're saving lives. However, that is incredibly narrow and a very narrow, naive way to look at this, to think that we have this technology to do all of these really incredible things and we're only going to use it in a sliver of those instances. No, because this scoping does not reflect the resolution today. The resolution is parents should have the right to genetically enhance their children with nanotechnology. This isn't limited to just saving lives or even to just medical instances. So we have a lot more we actually need to consider when we're looking at this round. So for example, they talked about they don't want to advocate for designer babies today, only for life-saving instances. However, we still don't have a bright line as to what that means. Because earlier they talked about something that was beneficial to the child, but they never brought up the point that we don't have a bright line as to what beneficial is. We could argue what's beneficial or not all day long, actually. But an appearance sake, an athletics appearance, there's a lot of ways we can look at that. We have no bright line, and that is not safe. That's where actually the whole extinction genocide part comes in. Because all the ways you're able to change your genes, insert something harmful throughout a population, because you have this passed down from generation to generation, ultimately one that could lead to extinction. We're agreeing that it's not happening right now, and there's a reason that it's not happening right now, because this is an emerging technology. They mentioned it's already in the status quo, it's already happening, but that's not true. They even bring up the point that we're not having designer babies right now, and there's a reason we don't have designer babies right now. We don't have this technology yet. They bring up the idea from the one in China that it's impacting individuals that were able to stop this HIV. However, we have one embryo. We have one embryo, and a very, very young one at that. So, as my partner mentioned earlier, they found that scientists say there's no guarantee that these edits will actually work. They could be harmful, in fact. So when they're hinging their debate, they're saying that this is going to work on one embryo and we don't know, that is not a reason to vote for the affirmative today. Because they're arguing that we have this technology, that we're going to save the world with it and save these many people, but we simply don't have that yet. There's a lot we don't know, a little we sort of know, but a lot more that we don't know, and a lot of risks that are out there in the future. We know that there's the potential for genocide. We know there's the potential for designer babies. We know there's the potential for a giant health gap between the rich and the poor. We know that there's potential for cheating. We know a lot of these things, and we know that we're confused about a lot as well. That we don't have a definition of what a right is. We don't have a working definition of what this is going to look like practically in our government, on a national scale, on an international scale. There's a lot we don't know, and it all looks very dangerous. It looks very dangerous, and that's why we shouldn't even consider this, let alone have it as a right for parents to do this. Parents should not have the right to potentially hurt their child. Parents should not have the right to do something they know could harm them in the future. And additionally, we're not arguing that parents should never have this right. And the scientific community agrees. Most certainly we shouldn't let them have this right yet. We agree that technology is a really amazing thing, and we get a lot of science, but science moves faster than we know what to do with. And because of that, we shouldn't try to leap bounds and heads away when we know there are so many costs to this. So let's look at this on a cost-benefit analysis scale, looking at a way to figure out, sure, there are a lot of good things that could potentially maybe come out of this. However, we solidly know there are a lot of dangers from this, a lot of to hurt lives, to lose people. There's a lot that's bad that can happen. Because of that, this should not be a right. Just weighing this on a simple cost-benefit analysis scale, saying morally it's wrong, scientifically it's wrong, politically it's wrong. For all of these reasons, we strongly urge a vote mitigation. Thank you.
I'd like to give my final thanks for you being here and not walking out because it's been so boring. I know that it's been a really long day of debates for a lot of you, and I'm really glad that we're finally that you came here to watch us. Now, I'm going to talk about a few things. I'm going to discuss framing, and then I think with the three core issues that this debate revolves around. So let's talk about framing. We, in our first speech, gave the Nuffield Council of Bioethics as an example of how we should evaluate this round. They say that ultimately this should be considered a right if it is beneficial to the child, and specifically talked about it in medical cases. We would argue that if we can show that this is in the best interest of the child, this is always going to be good. But even if we consider it in a cost-benefit analysis, you're going to see that since we are decreasing the risk of death in almost every case, you're going to be considering the affirmative at the end of the day. Then they say that we should consider the right in all circumstances. I say this is bogus. When I say somebody has the right to food, am I saying that you have the right to eat endangered rhino meat? Am I saying that you have a right to eat other people? Am I saying that you have the right to do things that are morally reprehensible because you have the right to food? This is not what we're talking about, and nobody's because of this. They are merely making a slippery slope argument that does not make sense. I'd argue that you don't consider that at the end of the day, because that's not how rights work. Then, let's talk about the three core areas. I'd say the first is the question of whether or not this improves the medical outcomes for these children. Now, we gave you a couple of examples on our case about how this leads to, one, decreasing the risk of non-transmissible diseases by decreasing mutations in genes that increase the rates of heart disease and cancer later in life, and by transferring immunity to diseases that we are otherwise unable to combat. They haven't addressed our HIV example. So I want you to look at the fact that this ultimately serves as a kind of genetic vaccine, wherein people are no longer able to get HIV. Now, not everybody gets vaccines, but measles is still very, very rare, because there's something called herd immunity, which is something that is conferred on the population as soon as this is implemented. But second, the question of non-transmission. This means that people no longer have BRCA1, BRCA2, or P53 translations. Now, they say that this increases the risk of cancer in somatic cells. We already have a quote from Dr. George Church, who said that we should always consider the case in utero, because of the fact that this will lead to somatic cell treatment later in life. And we are decreasing the risk of that happening and creating secondary cancers, which is always going to be good. That ultimately means that we're winning on the medical layer of the debate. Now, consider that this is about life or death, which means that this point will always outweigh the others. But let's look at the other life or death point, genocide. They say that this will lead to genocide for some nebulous reason, because we now have the ability to alter genomes. Consider first, we already consider genomes through in vitro fertilization technology, and are specifically wiping out layers of the population by decreasing their ability to donate sperm, or by aborting infants early in life, or pursuing IVF. This already exists. But also consider the example I gave in my last speech that they didn't talk about, wherein I showed you that there was a deaf couple in London who specifically wanted a child that was like them, but because they were a lesbian couple, they were unable to get that. This reverses existing trends within society, because it is not society that determines the child, but the parents. This ultimately means that we are able to allow populations to continue to exist in the future, which decreases the chances of genocide.
Join me in thanking our debaters. Well, we're very, very fortunate to have this, and I should say a debate is not the ending point of a discussion, it's the beginning point. And we're also fortunate to have a couple of guests with us today who might help further our discussion a bit longer. So first I'd like to welcome from UNT's Department of Philosophy and Religion, Dr. Michael Thompson, who's here with us today. Dr. Thompson is a winner of the UNT student body's highest award given. He is a Fessor Graham Scholar. He is also a former Piper teaching nominee. His forthcoming book on Immanuel Kant and critical thought is sure to be a bestseller immediately on Amazon Prime. Dr. Thompson, would you share your wisdom with us on this debate topic?
Ooh, wisdom, that's a tall order. With the news cycle in the last 48 hours, there seems to be one of these sort of hot button topics. It's great that so many of you showed up to at least entertain both the pro and the con side of this debate, maybe to continue further conversation. It's difficult. We've found compelling reasons on both sides of the aisle here. It sounds like it could potentially provide us with some enhancements. Let's use that word carefully. Some enhancements for the future that could possibly improve the human condition. On the other side, there seems to be some potential dangers lurking, dangers that we don't have exactly, or haven't exactly determined in any concrete detail. And so I think part of this debate, this is what the affirmative side was trying to mount, was that the potential benefits that we can see right now may or may not, from the pro side, outweigh any potential consequences of debates, or I'm sorry, any potential negative consequences. But on the flip side, and this is what we've seen historically over thousands of years with incremental advances in technology, but then now much more rapid advances in technologies, that many of these things have unforeseen consequences that may have ripple effects, decades, generations, or maybe even hundreds of years in the future. So when we're contemplating which side, whether we agree with the affirmative in the case they've made, or we see what the negative offers as potential difficulties, and we're trying to decide whether we want to implement this in actual practice in our own lived lifetime, we really need to contemplate what the consequences are, both in the potential positives but also in the potential negatives. I haven't the foggiest which side to land on today. I think they both have done an excellent job in presenting their cases, just sort of in the larger spectrum of contemplating our human condition, both sort of from a philosophical but perhaps from a religious perspective as well, because we need to sort of tread lightly and think deeply about these issues. We have to decide today, because that's the format of the debate, we have to think deeply and considerably when we're trying to elect what is an ethical or what is a right that we want to implement. So in our own maybe constitutional policy or in terms of international implicit agreements about how we want to handle these things in the future. So thanks both teams. I think you've done an excellent job. Thanks for at least making the trip from Dallas. Right? We only had to travel a couple of feet from our building. Thanks for making the hike. And well done, both teams.
Thank you, Dr. We are also fortunate today to have with us the Director of Debate from Southern Methodist University, Dr. Ben Voth. I should say Dr. Voth is an argument scholar, a recognized scholar at SMU. He is the author of 3 different book-length projects, one on James Farmer Jr., one on genocide, another on the state of fragmentation in American democracy. He is the debate fellow at the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Center and works to coordinate debates and promote civic discussion with them. I've known him for many years through argumentation and forensics. He's a tireless advocate for civic discussion. Dr. Voth, would you give us your thoughts on this topic today?
Sure.
Here we go.
Yeah, again, and thanks to Dr. Delane. I mean, this is just a fantastic event. I think the simple thing I would say to you about a very complicated issue like this is that debate is good for all of these things. And that's why I'm a big advocate of debate anywhere and everywhere, and that's why this event at the University of North Texas is a beautiful thing. And Brian's done an incredible job here at the University of North Texas of making debate part of your intellectual culture, and makes all of you smarter, makes all of us better at thinking and going through the choices. But when you have a difficult question like how should we use technology, I think the best answers are going to come when societies debate about it. And so that's why it's great that North Texas is hosting, a very, literally cutting edge today debate about, what was happening in China this week. And so here's the University of North Texas at the front of that question debating, and we all kind of got to hear it. And the only other thing I kind of want to say, because I don't want to keep us here all evening or whatever, is just that I know when you watch these 4 people, you think, wow, gosh, they're really smart, and they are. And they're really articulate, and they're really amazing. But you might be sitting out there thinking, well, I could never do that. That's the part I want to challenge before I sit down here. Like, all of you should be debating. Now, and how many of you did debate today? Well, yay for you.
Yeah.
Yay for you, because you've done a great thing to make your life better, and not just your life better. Somebody that you care about in the future that needs you to advocate for them, you're going to be able to do that better than when you started this morning. Okay? I have a daughter who's disabled. She's gone through public schools, and we have to go to yearly meetings where we advocate for her and her care in the school. I wouldn't have been able to advocate for her all the 20 years of her life if I hadn't done debate. If you just did one debate today, you are ready to be more courageous for maybe a child that does have a disability in your family in the future, and care for them in a way that if you were reticent or scared, you couldn't do that. So debate is awesome, and that you have Professor Lane here at North Texas encouraging that. I know it seems like a burden right now when you're in your final exams and all that stuff, but when you come back later in life as an alumni, you're going to say to yourself, boy, Professor Lane really helped me out here, because I can take care of things that I care about, because I can speak out for them. And I'll just close with this quotation that's my favorite, and it was at the beginning of the book I wrote on genocide. It's from Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel, who said, "What hurts the victim most is not the physical cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander. See, none of y'all ever have to be silent in the future. You can speak up. All these people, these 4 debaters, wow, they're really good at that. But we can all be good at that. And so debate's beautiful in that way. I just want to say thanks to Brian Lane, Professor Lane. What a fantastic event. What a great performance.
I need to really say a word and thank UNT Debate. Please, thanks to Joy and Emily for participating in this. They didn't get noticed very far in advance, so please thank them. Thanks to the SMU Mustangs for coming to join us today. Thank you all. And thank you, our audience members. This is the culmination of an event for Debate Day, and it's also the culmination of our Advocating in Public class. I do want to say we would love for all of you to come and join us at UNT Debate. Our Vice President is here. You can speak with her about all the things that we do at UNT Debate, and a number of our coaches. We really do appreciate all of your participation. We've said in this course at the beginning of the semester, this is something we want to last longer than December. So it's December. But we hope that the value of the things like today and the value of the things from the course go on even further than that. And if you're a person who's come to witness Debate Day, and maybe you participated in it before, or maybe you came for the first time, we hope you had a good time. We hope you enjoyed it. Really go forward and advocate as much as you possibly can. Find things that are important to you and work hard for those things. Thanks everybody for coming today. Really appreciate it.